Hello and welcome to another installment of All Things Considered.
The show where we ask you to consider all things instead of picking a single classic for your consideration.
Now, if this is your first All Things Considered, basically it's an open review show where Dustin and I each pick a couple of movies that we've seen recently.
And then we give them a quick review, quick rundown, and ask you to possibly consider those for your next movie night.
Well said. All right, so we rock, paper, scissored this before we started, and Dustin was, I suppose, the winner?
The winner, the person who gets to choose. We didn't actually decide beforehand, but I'm going first is the long answer to the short question. And for my first film, as past listeners might notice, I do little themes with mine, and this installment, my theme is people who should have just called in sick instead of going to work. And the first one is Kevin Smith's 2014 Tusk.
Always do sober what you do drunk. That'll teach you to keep your mouth shut.
Hemingway said that.
Yes, he did. And he said it to me.
I don't want you to go to Canada tomorrow.
It's for the podcast. It's what I do.
I travel around and I interview weird or interesting people.
So look out, you crazy Canucks!
Wandering Wallace takes a raunchy road trip up to the Great White North.
Hello. I'm an old man who has enjoyed a long and storied life at sea. And after eons of oceanic adventure, I know I do not wish to spend my remaining years alone when I have such stories to share.
How far is Bifrost from here?
It's about 2 hours from here.
It's about 2 hours away.
I hate American guys.
I'm so scared. This guy wants to turn me into an animal or something. I don't want to die in Canada.
Now, Kevin Smith, he decided, for whatever reason, to do a trilogy of Canadian-themed horror movies. And this was the first of them. I do not recommend Yoga Hosers, although I am looking forward to Moose Jaws, because Jaws only with a moose sounds stupid and awesome. But Tusk could also be said to be sort of a comedic human centipede, which I actually did on our first All Things Considered, in the sense that what happens is the guy goes off for his own podcast to interview a kid who accidentally cut off his own leg doing sort of the whole Star Wars kid thing, except he was playing with a samurai sword. That kid turned up to be dead, so he's trying to make sure his trip to Winnipeg wasn't a waste of his time. Gets this note from this old hermit who lets him know that, hey, you can come live here for a bit for free. I just want some company. I got some stories to tell, and this is what I want to do with my time. So he's like, all right, shoot, that sounds interesting. Goes up there, and the one storyline is how he gets captured by this guy. He gets drugged, and this guy has this obsession with a walrus. And it is hilariously portrayed. The guy who plays the villain in this...
Michael Parks.
Michael Parks? I love his acting in it. It is spot on all the time.
Recently deceased.
That is unfortunate.
He was also in Red State. That's where Kevin Smith started his relationship with Michael Parks.
And I did actually enjoy Red State.
I remember being in the room with you when you watched it.
But there's a lot of oddball comedy in Tusk. Not just some of the things that the villain says during the whole capture, or when Johnny Depp's very, very poor accented French-Canadian detective is talking to him at a different part of the movie. But he, after obsessing about this walrus, decides to turn these guests of his into a walrus to answer the age-old question that man has been pondering ever since the Sphinx: is man truly a walrus? It is dumb and awesome, but it is at the same time incredibly dark and twisted. The scenes with those two going back and forth, you can feel the tension, and it's actually very atmospheric and very well done. And then you go back to the guy's podcast partner and girlfriend looking for him, and there'll be other ridiculous scenes. There's a stereotypically Canadian convenience store. There's, of course, Johnny Depp's bad Frenchman impersonation.
The convenience store is where the Yoga Hosers come in, right?
Absolutely. The two...
Johnny Depp's daughter and Kevin Smith's daughter.
Yeah. I forget their name. They're the two Heathers, the two somethings. We'll cut that out. Those two are the Yoga Hosers, which was just a dumb movie. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, though it has a good first half until the whole story comes along. And Haley Joel Osment's great in it, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Tusk. And just like in Human Centipede, he ends up in the suit early enough that you're stuck there watching his mental decay as he's getting all these tests and having all these things done to him to turn him more into a walrus for this crazy old man's weird desires. And I think it actually plays out very well, and it does very good as sort of a black comedy. I know some people might not appreciate Johnny Depp's bad accent. That's the one major complaint in terms of the movie and acting that I've heard, besides the whole body horror thing, which is why my friend was unable to keep watching because she saw it coming, despite the fact that I told her that's what the movie's about beforehand, before we started watching it. But whatever. If you're interested in sort of a dark body horror, psychological horror, I would highly recommend Tusk. Go into it expecting some dumb stuff, expecting some dumb comedy mixed in, and you shouldn't be disappointed.
I haven't seen the film myself. It's on my infinitely long viewing queue.
And I've been trying to get him to watch it for weeks now.
But I heard that it came about because after Red State, Kevin Smith had gotten it in his head to make basically like a rubber suit monster movie. And then after making Tusk, he enjoyed it so much, all he wants to do now is make rubber suit monster movies for a while. Which I believe is why he decided to turn it into a trilogy.
I really look forward to Moose Jaws, is all I have to say. And then turning it over to you there, Mike, for your first review.
For me, I recently went to the theater and saw the 2017 period comedy by Jeff Baena, The Little Hours.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, sweetheart. I know how eager you are to be married, but maybe that's not your calling.
What's going on with Sister Alessandra? Probably like daydreaming about some guy that's going to magically come and take her away from here.
Did he just smile at you?
I don't know.
Why is he smiling? Who is that?
I don't know.
Sister Ginevra?
Sister Fernanda. Sister Alessandra. Sister Maria. These are your sins.
Bling, bling, bitch. Do my own thing, bitch.
Abusive language.
Spit on me. They called me a Jew.
Lustfulness. Homosexuality.
It's too tight.
Did you roll your eyes? You were rolling your eyes.
Preaching to you little bitches. Did you hear what I said?
These girls can be tough. I'm not gonna lie. They can be very tough.
What is this shit?
This is a turnip.
That's not a turnip, it's shit!
They physically have attacked people.
You know what my father is? Yeah, you can talk to us, you ain't world!
So respect my business. Bling, bling, bitch. Do my own thing, bitch.
Is it true that you've never been touched by a man?
No, never.
It's the greatest pleasure on earth.
Looking out for my mama and my day one bitches.
It's a mortal sin. We wouldn't get into heaven. Yeah, then you probably shouldn't do it.
Apostasy. Abusive language. Heresy. Revelings. Eating blood. Do you think I've ever written down eating blood before? Where am I?
Bling, bling, bitch. Do my own thing, bitch.
Now, The Little Hours is essentially a 14th century sex romp. The story was loosely based off of Giovanni Boccaccio's The Decameron. The Decameron is a book which contains like 100 different stories. This is, I think, like the third story of the first part of the Decameron. To my understanding, it was just something that Jeff Baena saw and felt that he could kind of turn into something fun. And essentially what it is Dave Franco plays, I believe his character's name is Macedo, who is a servant of Nick Offerman's, which Nick Offerman plays a great character. He's a pompous lord, and his wife can't stand him, and his wife has been banging Dave Franco, Macedo. And when Offerman finds out about it, Franco makes a run for it, and while he's running, he bumps into a priest, played by John C. Reilly.
Which lets you know exactly how serious the movie's going to be.
And he helps John C. Reilly out, and he's like, how can I repay you? I have no money. And he's like, well, I kind of just need a place to stay. He's like, well, you should come stay at the convent that I work at. And so they go back there. They recently lost their gardener, their groundskeeper, because Aubrey Plaza, Kate Micucci, and Alison Brie, who play Fernanda, Ginevra, and Alessandra, I believe their names are, they are mean, abusive nuns. and they treated the groundskeeper very poorly. He quit. So Dave Franco comes in, pretends he's mute and deaf, takes over the groundskeeper job, and essentially there's this weird kind of social and emotional tumult going on within the convent, and the nuns sort of take out all of their curiosities and frustrations on the mute deaf groundskeeper, played by Dave Franco. They could have gone a couple of ways with this movie. They could have gone totally period, or they could have gone totally not period. I really respect Baena's choice to go with the period trappings insofar as, you know, it looks period, it's placed, the landscape, everything, you know, the costumes, but the language and the delivery and sort of the way that they treat the narrative of the story is very contemporary. It does a fine high-wire act of balancing those two sort of disparate attitudes, and does an amazing job, and it's really entertaining, and it's funny, and it's clever. It's more clever than you think it should be at times, and at times it's just kind of silly dumb, and it goes in weird places and changes tones. Overall, at the end of it, you just sort of feel amused, entertained, satisfied, and everybody who's in it is like totally committed to it, so it really comes through. And I mean, like, John C. Reilly, Molly Shannon, Fred Armisen, Paul Reiser, Alison Brie, Dave Franco, Kate Micucci, Aubrey Plaza, who also produced the film, all quality comic and dramatic actors, and they just bring it, and it's hilarious. It's good fun.
You mentioned that they have the modern language. Do they ever use anachronisms
in
there?
No, that's one of the nice things about it, is that I think that's kind of how they manage to maintain that clever balance, because they use, you know, modern curse words, and the delivery is in a very modern style, but they're talking about 14th century stuff.
And they're keeping it straight.
So they're talking about, you know, who stole my donkey, or I can't think of anything else. But yeah, it's not like it takes place in the 14th century, but then, you know,
they're looking at their wristwatch.
So yeah, or making like an iPod reference, or it's not wink and a nudge humor.
It's played straight.
I think they just decided, it's kind of like when you go to see a Shakespeare movie or a Shakespeare play, where they choose to modernize the language just so that, you know, the audience or possibly the cast doesn't have to, you know, slog through or get accustomed to ye old English.
Or when they do the exact opposite and they have it modernized but use the old language.
Which I actually find to be more of, I think that has more cognitive dissonance for me than the reverse.
It always seems really weird.
Like, I tried watching the 2000 Hamlet with Ethan Hawke just the other day, and within 5 minutes, having these people running around using Shakespeare's language
while driving a car
and, you know, having board meetings and wearing suits and stuff and going up elevators. Yeah, it was kind of jarring. But I definitely enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I would. And I'm probably going to check out Jeff Baena's other work, because if it's half as good as, or if I enjoy it half as much as I enjoyed The Little Hours, I think I will be pleased. So I would, very big thumbs up, very big recommend for The Little Hours. And Dustin's looking at me like he wants me to pass the baton on to him for his second choice of today's show.
That is what that look was. That gaze. That longing gaze.
The Dustin gaze.
The stare down.
The Friesen gazing?
Friesen gazing? Wouldn't that be a horse gaze? How do they stare?
Standing up.
I heard that donkeys have a malevolent stare, but that depends on how much you pay attention to Weeble. Let's see if anyone gets that reference.
Moving on.
For my second movie, where somebody should have just stayed home that day, it's also 2014, another horror film that is also psychological horror, except not a comedy this time. Directed by Anthony DiBlasi, it is called Last Shift.
Hello?
Sergeant Cohen.
Officer Lauren.
You are the lucky rookie to work the very last shift.
Help me. I'm trapped. I think they might all be dead.
This is Officer Lorne at the old station. I'm investigating a B&E. Sir. Hey. Hello. Who's in here? Answer me!
This wannabe Manson family kidnapped and slaughtered those poor girls.
They also killed the Baena family on the scene of the crime.
It's what they wanted you to believe.
Are you suggesting we're devil worshippers?
We don't pray to him. And who do you think was there before him?
You have to stop them.
Who's coming?
He is more powerful than you. He is righteous. He is the way. You will die.
Is it real?
Stars Juliana Harkavy, who is a rookie police officer whose first shift is the last shift of the old precinct. They're shutting it down after this night. They're waiting for the hazmat team to come by to get rid of some stuff they couldn't just throw into the garbage because of blood and other bodily fluids and whatnot. And so she's stuck there doing nothing but redirecting anybody who walks up to the new precinct. All the calls are supposed to be redirected already, so it should be a nice, boring, easy night. But very quickly, things start to go awry. She starts getting phone calls from somebody who's claiming that they found her. She's been kidnapped, and there's, like, pigs around. She's on a ranch somewhere. Tries to give that information to the new precinct. They don't seem to know why she's getting any calls whatsoever. There's a homeless guy who keeps showing up, starts peeing on the floor. Other people just hanging around, and things start falling over. She starts hearing things coming from different places. Lights start shutting off. Visions. It's pretty clear that it's a haunting, though at first she's not. While she's scared, she sort of leans towards the idea that maybe it's a prank, maybe it's a practical joke going on. A police officer comes by to check up on her, who I was watching it with Mike, and he predicted that he was a ghost, and just how's it going to be revealed. And he was entirely accurate, and as things keep devolving, she calls for help. The radio doesn't seem to work. She calls the sergeant who was there beforehand. He says, "Are you kidding me with this bullshit? Just, are you going to do your day? Are you too scared to spend a single night alone in a building? Are you going to quit now? Or am I going to see you first thing in the morning?" So she's scared about losing her job. That's the reason why she's sort of sticking around. She doesn't want to fail her father, who was a police officer, who we learn died in the line of duty, in relation to the haunting. And as things keep getting worse and worse for her, you can see her going slowly more and more nuts. And I think that she acts it extremely well. You can tell that it's a slow deterioration. You can see the fact that she's trying to follow protocol and procedure, while at the same time also being scared and nervous about a number of things. You can see her snapping at the homeless guy, leaving him to be killed because she's too scared to let him out. All sorts of little things, which is great when you're sort of just following her around. The camera's constantly moving around in ways to make it look like she's being watched, as opposed to just sitting there alone and being dull. It keeps you involved in the movie. And other than her, I also really loved the sergeant at the beginning. He's freaking out. He's acting all sorts of strange, and as far as I'm concerned, you can tell that the haunting isn't just affecting her, it's affecting a number of other people because he's also losing it. Not to her extent, though.
Don't they actually say in the movie that the new police station was opened not just because of, like, bad plumbing in the old police station?
Yeah, she was talking to the person at the new precinct and talking about seeing things and hearing some things, and he's like, okay, like, we don't like to talk about this, but ever since a year ago, like, those guys, they didn't die on the scene, they died here, and ever since that night, weird things have been happening. At first, it was small, but it keeps growing. At a certain point, she hears something, and she's sort of in a trance and says, yeah, okay, click, just sort of while he's trying to explain to her what's going on, just hangs up on him to go investigate something else that's going on. And it drives her completely mad, and I actually like how it ends. I like how it plays out, although if you look at any of the promotional material, it really tries to play up a satanic cult aspect, which Mike and I agree was a failure on their marketing department's part.
They swung for the fences and they went for like the big shock kind of marketing where it's got like King of Hell plastered all over it and that kind of bloody face poster thing, where this movie, it's got much more of like a Session 9 slow build and decay into madness, and it's more about atmosphere and environment, and yeah, like they should have sold it more on that, and I think it probably would have played better, or it might have gotten more attention when it was out in the world.
As it stands, it was well reviewed when it was on the indie film circuit, though I think I saw it on Netflix a while back. It's no longer there, but I think it's definitely worth a look for anyone who's looking for a good, creepy ghost story.
I was really impressed. You had mentioned it to me, and I'd passed on it, and then changed my mind and sat down and watched it with you, and it was really entertaining. I mean, we kind of talked out a lot of the sort of pros and cons while we were in the throes of viewing it, but it's a good example of what you can do with not a lot of money, a decent idea, some good camera work.
And a good actor.
Yeah. Juliana Harkavy was... I haven't honestly seen her in anything else. I haven't seen her on Arrow as Black Canary, but she was great in this. I totally bought her as an officer of the law. She had a way of carrying herself, and there was an attitude and playing like the rookie thing.
There was that uncertainty that she was able to pull off as a rookie that was entirely believable, plus the fear was believable. It was all believable.
As I said the night that we watched it, I would probably pull back a little bit on like the connective tissue with the familial stuff that's kind of involved. But yeah, overall, man, if you've got 88 minutes and you don't know what to do with yourself...
There are worse ways to spend your time. And speaking of ways to spend your time that aren't too bad, I believe you have a second movie for us, Michael?
I thought you were going to say, and speaking of worse ways to spend your time? Yeah, my second film. Originally, I was going to do 2 documentaries. I've been on a documentary binge, but then I went and saw The Little Hours, and I was like, I'm going to throw that in there. But one documentary did stick around, and that was the 2015 documentary by Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow, DePalma.
You've got to realize you're being criticized against the fashion of the day. And when the fashion changes, everybody forgets about that. Being a director is being a watcher. You have a lot of egos in the room, and you have to sort of watch how they interact with each other. There was Marty and I, then there was George and Francis and Stephen. What we did in our generation will never be duplicated. You're battling a very difficult system, and all the values of that system are the opposite of to what goes into making original good movies. The problem of working in the Hollywood system is you can lose your way. My movies tend to upset people a lot, so you can imagine the things they're trying to take out of my movies. I did grow up in an operating room. I saw a lot of blood. I had been battling with the ratings board, and it kept on getting X's, and then I said, absolutely, I'm not changing it anymore. And what I did that really drove them all crazy is that I put everything back in. It's all X to me.
Say hello to my little friend!
When you do some of these things, they make perfect logical sense to you, and then you put them in front of an audience, they go, holy cow.
I'm not really a big Brian De Palma fan. There are Brian De Palma movies that I love. I love Untouchables. I love Mission Impossible. Just the fact that those are 2 of my favorite De Palma films should tell you where I sort of lean in terms of his body of work. I know he's more known for things like Body Double, Femme Fatale, Scarface, Carrie. And I think that's partly why I've kind of steered away from him. I mean, I see his movies more accidentally than on purpose. But I really enjoyed watching this legendary director just basically sit there for 2 hours and talk about his body of work kind of from beginning to end. He does spend less time talking about his more recent films, which may be a bias of the filmmakers, which may be a bias of his, because as he does say, a filmmaker generally makes his best movies in his 30s, 40s, 50s.
How old is he then?
I think he's like 70. Yeah, he's like 77. But I understand the desire to spend more time on, you know, the early, more famous films, the ridiculous Phantom of the Paradise, or Sisters, or Dressed to Kill, Blowout, Carlito's Way. The most interesting thing for me was finding out, like, I kind of felt like Scarface, that was a Brian De Palma movie, like, through and through. But he didn't initially want to do that movie. He wanted to do another movie, got talked on to doing this movie, and then the writer of Scarface, something happened, and then that writer moved on to do the movie, or to develop the movie that De Palma was originally working on. And then Oliver Stone came on, and then there was problems on the set with Oliver Stone because Oliver Stone was talking to the actors, and the writer should never be talking to the actors, because the actors should be just following the one vision of the director's vision, not having, you know, like conflicting views. And for how much of a classic sort of that movie is, to find out sort of what the feeling was going into making it, to find out that it wasn't kind of received well initially, you know, it's sort of built up its status over time. And even going into a movie like Mission Impossible and finding out kind of what a shit show that was behind the scenes, and how much convincing it would take to get, you know, Tom Cruise to agree to stuff, and how the writing on that sort of played out, and just
all of the camera wizardry that needed to go on to make Tom Cruise not look 5'6".
De Palma is one of those directors who has this sort of cult legendary status, and he's been behind some Oscar-winning, amazing movies, but he's still kind of an embattled artist. He's still a guy who does things on his own terms, does things his own way, makes the movies he wants to make, and when he gets that recognition, it's because, for whatever reason, his tastes and our tastes are crossing over at the right time, in the right place, and then sort of the twain don't meet again for, you know, another few years until he makes another movie that just manages to sort of catch the zeitgeist. But as somebody who just hasn't really spent a lot of time with De Palma films, it was really interesting hearing somebody talking about his craft. It was really interesting learning about movies that I'm familiar with but don't really know a lot about. And I'm definitely going to take a dive into his back catalog and check out some films. It also gave me the urge to put a little pressure on you to maybe throw a De Palma movie in an upcoming episode. Just because I realized we haven't really done, or it's been a while since we've done one of those benchmark American directors.
I know when it comes to any movie that I'm looking at doing, I don't generally look at the director and then choose a movie. I start with a genre, something that we haven't done lately is my usual thing. Try to go something, a different cinematic age, a different country. I have no problem with any individual director, so go ahead.
No, you know, we have been kind of wandering around, and we have been doing some interesting stuff, and I've been loving, you know, the episodes that we are doing. But watching this documentary, it did give me this urge. It had like this magnetic pull to bring us back to, like, you know, if Carrie's on the list, or Untouchables, or Scarface, or, you know, I'm sure one or more of those is on there.
If not all three.
Although we're often surprised by which ones are not on there.
And sometimes surprised by which ones are. And how well rated they are.
This is true. So yeah, that's
4 potential movies for your viewing pleasure.
So just to recap quickly the films we covered today.
We've got Tusk by Kevin Smith.
The Little Hours by Jeff Baena.
Last Shift by Anthony DiBlasi.
And De Palma by Noah Baumbach and Jake Paltrow. We would encourage that if our discussion has made you curious about any of these films, you go check them out.
And if there's any films that you think we should check out, feel free to let us know.
And of course, the best way to let us know is through our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a WordPress blog at wordpress.com/FYC show. If you get the show off of iTunes, rate and review us. We'd really appreciate it. And if you know anybody who uses iHeartRadio or Stitcher, we are also available through there, as well as on YouTube, where we have a YouTube channel with all of our episodes being cross-posted there as well.
You could also just wrap your questions and comments onto a little sheaf of paper attached to a pigeon's leg, and hopefully it'll make its way to either us or Mike Tyson.
We also have an email. We haven't talked about the email for like 2 years, but we do have a Gmail account, fycshowmail@gmail.com. You could email us text, pictures, memes, videos, whatever.
Text us a picture of a pigeon with the note that you want to send us on its ankle. I think that would work. I would respond to that.
And if you enjoy the show and you want to support us, we do have a Patreon campaign on patreon.com/fycshow. I think we've got some decent reward levels, reward tiers kind of set up. Give what you can. If you can't support financially but still want to give us a hand, share the page on your social media. Let other people know that it's out there, and that would help us a lot. And with that, I think we officially bring another episode of All Things Considered to a close. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope to see you next week, where we will most likely be returning to our regular episodic format covering classic films.
Or not so classic films.
Or not so classic films.
So until then, I've been Dustin Friesnan.
And I'm Mike Josick.
Take care.
Ruby Dooby.
Bitch, you gotta think big. Don't let me catch you knocked up having a nigga's kids. You are not the white people swallowing niggas' kids. These niggas be doing biz. These niggas be in my fridge. These niggas be smoking mids and thinking that they the shit. Walk up in your crib and be asking if they could live. Not about that. These bitches is gullible like a mousetrap. Cheese ain't real fucking cum bucket. Hyped off 4-piece nugget. He will never cuff you cause your pussy is budget. Bling bling bitch, do my own thing bitch. Fuck a wedding, bring that ding-a-ling was just a fling bitch.
And we bring it up on the show and talk about it for a couple of minutes amongst ourselves, and then hopefully bring that to you.
Not at all awkwardly said.